This is the What Else Did You Watch podcast with Carlos, Molly, and Aaron. Music by Duke of Julian. Please note this podcast is full of spoilers. Thanks for listening.
It's waveforming. Oh, that is juicy, isn't it? Lovely. All right. So, welcome everybody.
I'm Aaron.
And I'm Carlos.
And I'm Molly.
Molly, what movie did you pick this week?
This week, had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do, and I just went back into the archives in my brain and decided on pulling out Night Watch, Nochny Dozor, 2004, the highest grossing film ever made or by Russian film.
At the time.
At the time. Is there something new? Is there something different now?
I think it was past the next year. Yeah,
Oh,
that was
really?
that was part of my research.
Okay. Well, I'm
so
looking forward to hearing this. So hopefully you guys had a chance to watch it on Vudu. There's a whole series of different versions. I think this is one of those movies that I stumbled upon some dark, dreary winter back when Netflix when actually send you the DVDs, and I was getting to the bottom of the barrel of things. The embedded subtitles were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I don't think I've ever seen any movie do it, but it really adds an awful lot to it. So going back into this, there is still so much about this movie that I really like. There are things in my age and maturity that I'm looking back and I'm thinking, holy mother of God. The editing, for example, is just a wild experience of nothing but chaos. And yet, this thing still hits all kinds of happy buttons for me. So, before I get into the elements that I really, really like about this still, because neither one of you have seen it before, who wants to go first? Aaron, Carlos, jump in.
Aaron, you want to do a plot recap?
Sure, yeah. What is this movie about? This movie is, I guess, hundreds of years ago in Russia. There was a great battle between the forces of good and evil, who are mythical creatures, magical creatures. They're witches and sorcerers and shapeshifters and vampires. And so they started a truce. And the truce involved these people. Is it the Day Watches?
The Day
The
Watch
Night
and the
Watch?
Night Watch.
Yeah, the Day Watch.
Yes.
They are the light watching the dark, and then the Night Watch is the dark watching
The other way around. The
other
Night
way
Watch
around.
are the light others policing the dark others, and the Day Watch
Okay.
are the dark others policing the light others. The other
I
aspect I
should have
like,
written that down.
yeah, I mean, but the other aspect that I like about it is that you become an other, or like it's in you, and you discover you're an other,
Mhm.
but you have to choose which side.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I love this, and it's an interesting time that it came out because I remember all the other movies that were coming out around the time. It was a couple years after Fight Club, but it was reminiscent of that in terms of like the impressionistic editing and everything that was going on. But there was other supernatural stuff like the Underworld series was coming out right around then. Um, let's see, Blade,
Oh, that's
which was another
right.
sort of like the crazy vampire sort of thing, Van Helsing. Um, yeah, there's a little throw to Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the movie too, which was super fun.
Super sweet.
It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
yeah, so it was kind of an interesting time for these dark sort of supernatural vampire-y modern day things with the crossover. Um, and I liked it because it wasn't a normal sort of plot that you see in a lot of these types of action movies where there's a very clear protagonist and very clear antagonist, and there's some sort of battle that they're fighting against each other because of revenge or because of ambition or because of end of the world or something like that. Well, there is end of the world here, but it wasn't the way you think it is. It wasn't somebody was trying to destroy the world. They're all of the characters are trying to preserve the world.
Yeah.
Um, and it made for a really good interesting narrative because they're trying to figure out what's going wrong and trying to fix it, and they're in a way cooperating, but at the same time they're not. So it was nice that it wasn't just the very formulaic sort of here's the bad guy, here's the good guy, and there's going to be a big fight at the end, and somebody's going to get their head slimed. Um, yeah, I super.
Can I make a comment on
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah,
You are deeply underselling how weird the plot of this movie is, and how absolute you're talking about it like it's like a 40s noir. Where you're like, yeah, and so there was a lot of normalcy in the plot. All the characters kind of really made sense.
Yeah.
It's like,
No,
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 they
no.
didn't. What are you
And
talking
that's what I
about?
loved about this movie. Like, even now, it is a masterclass in show, don't tell. So, Aaron, I think that you are absolutely right. Oh, I've seen the eyebrows go out there, Carlos. But no, I mean, like, so it sets it up as, light versus dark. And yet, the bigger issues have to do with individuals that are like the normal people that are affected by this massive battle. And it turns out that it's not these massive, archetypal forces that really have any power. It's the normal people that are responding to being pawns in this system that ultimately make or break what's going to happen. What I'm meaning by like, it's a masterclass in show, don't tell. It reminds me a lot of Miyazaki in that he creates these fantasy worlds without a ton of expository. Like, you get dropped in to a world that has an internal logic, and it is up to you to keep up. It's almost like
yeah.
going to visit a different country, and everybody knows all the players and how to get along with each other and who has what types of power. Who like the money changer is, and the guy that can open up the restaurant at 4 o'clock in the morning if you need to get a bus ticket and stuff like that. And you've got to just keep up with it. Um,
That's the theme of the movie too, is all the characters are trying to figure out what's going on with themselves. And even once they do find out what's going on with themselves, there's greater forces that are happening that were a result consequences of their actions, which I thought was really interesting. And Carlos, I do think it's very complex. Um, the characters and how the plot is laid out. It was refreshing that it wasn't very simplistic and kind of two dimensional. What was the point you were making about a noir movie?
That this movie is fucking
It
bonkers.
is.
That a lot of people
I know.
are gonna watch this movie, have no fucking idea what's going on. I mean, this is true Molly core at
Absolutely
its center.
is.
It
Kinda,
really
yeah.
fits into that. Molly, when you said it's like going to another country, it's like, no, this is like being dropped in a country after having amnesia. Where it's like, oh, I guess she can turn into a tiger. We're never gonna see that again, really. So get on board with that right
Yeah.
now. Um, I think the plot's a little bit more indiscutable than you guys are selling it as, though it did come together,
Yeah.
I guess,
Well,
in the
yeah.
end.
It felt like
Oh, good. Go ahead,
oh, I
Aaron.
was gonna say it kind of reminded me of Stalker,
Mhm.
um, which which has this theme of people trying to find something that's kind of mysterious. It's this magical room that'll give you whatever you want, and once they get there, they realize that it's going to give them something awful because what they really, really want is probably something dark and primal as opposed to what they aspire to want, which
Yeah.
is something that humanistic. And that's similar to this, the themes of that, where people do things that are really kind of dark and unnatural. They try to be better people as a result of it. The main character Anton does something
Mhm.
awful at the beginning, and it kind of corrupts who he is and his world. And because he has these supernatural powers, it has this additional ripple effect that has consequences beyond what he really can comprehend or control, which I think is super interesting. They're their own antagonists or their bad decisions that are unredeemed.
Right, right. Well,
So
and in
yeah.
some ways, oh no, he ends up cursing himself as
Mhm.
well. In some
Yeah,
ways, like
exactly.
it's, and you can tell because the haircut changes, if nothing else. Um, so he goes from like this innocent fellow to realizing what he actually is capable of doing before he gets stopped, um, or before he pulls himself back from the edge. And I don't know that he ever quite recovers from what he learned about himself. I know, Carlos, you haven't had
Right.
a chance to go yet, but just a few more things that I really like. And again, this has been, I don't know, it's been more than a decade since I've seen this. Um, for one thing, like I hate to even use the word genre with this, but it's such an incredible and again bonkers mashup of you have some characters that look like they could have come out of a Columbo or like a 1970s, like the guys that are driving around in the trash truck type of a thing.
Yeah.
Like they're just like these um, blue collar working dudes that have this particular job, you know, um, and the head evil guy is wearing the Russian, like tracksuit, that garish red, which is just brilliant for the most part.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really like about this, and I know we'll get into the kind of demographics of the whole thing later, but one of the things that I read is they hired like 17 different special effects companies to work on this thing, which again is crazy. But a lot of the visuals, um, things that still work really well for me. A lot of the visuals remind me so much of Russian icons. So where we do special effects and where like the Marvel movies do these big set pieces and you've got like whooshing spinning cameras and things like that, most of these tableaus are flat. So even in that first scene when you've got the old witch woman and then you've got the one character that turns into a tiger, that is a flat camera, and you see it jump in and then you cut to something else. There is riches in each and every one of those scenes. There's not a lot of like cameras diving into scenes as much as it's really kind of claustrophobic, but all of the background has everything that you need to understand that person and who they are and who they have been. Like the other one that I thought was absolutely fantastic is near the end when Anton is talking to the woman who's responsible for this vortex opening up, and the light, and you've just got like these streams of light that are coming through. It's very dark, very blue, and then on occasion you get the flashes of lightning. But when you get the flashes of lightning, the colors in that apartment, the wallpaper and the photos, or not the artwork that's on, like that's a lot of work to go into the design of this one room that you only get to see in its fullness in those flashes. And yet you understand so much about her and her life with her mother, just as like those flashes. It's just gorgeous. There's depth and riches in the set design of each of these individual rooms that I really, really, really appreciate. And I know again that we have kind of gotten into you know, the Denis Deneuve kind of like massive, epic, flowing, widescreen, visuals. But there's something that can be done by keeping that focus super, super tight and just putting riches of texture and color and objects in a background that yeah. And the one last thing about the special effects is like they are definitely all over the place, right? So there's the one where you have like at the beginning, you've got the stop motion with the doll with the spider feet. And it's like, what the fuck is this? And it never gets explained, but it doesn't have to get explained because it works in that moment. It's absolutely terrifying. And then later, when you have Gesser that is talking about the woman that had, with the curse, and it's that very lovely animation. So you take the pen drawing that he's been doing in the margins of this book, and you never see that type of special effect ever again in the entire thing, and yet it works. Like you're in the world of crazy. Like anything becomes animated and magical. Go ahead.
And that's why they hired a few different studio houses for that, right? A few different CGI companies for that, is because they kind of specialized in different types of CGI, right? So there's the one who does the sort of animal creation, right, for the tiger, and then the drawing, like you're saying, and then there's, I can it's hard to tell first time watching a movie how much of this is sort of like set dressing CGI, right? Like I think that's much more common now than it would have been in 2004 in the Russian film market, right? But I'm willing to bet that there was a little bit of that going on as well, right? That there's just touches of stuff that add just a little bit more, right? Like a building far away with the red star. I don't know if that was CGI or not, right? But 17 houses, which in 2004, I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think now it's like they use whatever it is, 100,000 studio houses to finish across the Spider Verse. You know, that.
And I think it's part of also the one of the themes of the movie, which is it's kind of going through time, and all these people have been existing through time. So you see a lot of the things that they're using on a day-to-day basis are, it's older technology mixed with newer technology. They're using flashlights with Christmas bulbs to fight vampires. And it's kind of all the different motifs of the movie too, where you have some super low tech stuff that like Molly said with the drawings and just that regular animation. And then you have extremely advanced CGI when they go into the gloom area and you see
Mhm.
all the blood vessels and they start changing and there's these little matrices with mosquitoes around it. So it's yeah, I very or the PlayStation game that he's playing, which is kind of this very, very rudimentary now, but it's probably pretty
Mhm.
awesome in 2004. But it's all of these different mixtures of technology making the movie.
Yeah.
There's one really awesome CGI scene where the bolt or the rivet falls off the airplane, falls down past all the crows and cockroaches through the vent pipe into the woman's coffee.
Hmm.
All of that is great, and I think it really kind of lends to entertaining the audience a little bit more, as opposed to just kind of tricking them with stupid effects, or trying to fool them with some sort of CGI against a green screen. It's more of a kaleidoscope that's more entertaining for the audience
Yeah.
than trying
It,
to suspend their disbelief.
Yeah, I agree. And it adds this weird, like everything has the capacity for magic. You just don't necessarily know what the flavor of magic is. Um,
Mhm.
and I agree with you with the bolt that falls, and of course it perfectly tells you what's going on and who's kind of responsible for this whole thing. The video game, if you're not paying attention, he's working out how to actually win to get the kid to come over to the dark. And, you get the sense
Yeah.
that he's been working on this for like years, He's just doing iteration after iteration after iteration after iteration until he figures out how to do that. And even to jump back to the very beginning and how I think that like these wacky special effects really add to it when you get the expository about there's the others of light and the others of dark and they finally the Gezer and Zabalov walk to the center and you have that one human in the middle and they're both whispering in his ear and they have like pulled him. I don't think that he volunteered, but they have chosen this human being to be the carrier of the pack, right? Of the pact between the two of them. Like he is now, and you see him just, it's too much. He's almost like the sacrificial goat. And you watch his face, you just see like the little voices whispering, and you see the pain, and then it completely ages him.
Mhm.
You don't get an explanation. He never comes back, but it's incredibly powerfully illustrative of kind of the whole way this world works, you know? Um, and anyway, you can tell that I'm still think it's a great movie, but
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the things that really excite you about it. That it really connects to some of those religious themes that keep coming up in the movies you keep choosing, right? And I guess that core question of good versus evil, and sort of the decisions made by the characters within that battle, right? Because this isn't as simple as like Captain America, the first Avenger, in terms of good versus evil, right? It's a little bit more nuanced, so I can understand why you're so connected to this particular story, right?
I'm a huge fan of the mythologies. As you guys have heard me say,
Yeah.
it's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And this one, again, is very much like Miyazaki. I'm going to draw a strange parallel: Princess Mononoke, which Princess Mononoke, they are no good guys or bad guys. They're individuals that have a particular um, fear, have a particular need, and are working to try to do what they think is best for how that they've already constructed the world. Um, and in that particular case, um, Ashishoka, I'm getting the name completely wrong, but like the main character ends up being basically Buddhist, you know, Ashitaka. So he doesn't really have a particular. You're giving me the look like I know what I'm saying. Um,
I'll take your word for it, dog.
I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, so in that case, you have a character that ends up just addressing suffering as he finds people suffering and doesn't really take a side, is angry at all sides because that they are continuing to fight. In this case, like the vampire girl on the roof, you know, um, like what she has to say to the forces of light and darkness is like, you let me be used, like you bargained with my life and I had no choice in it. You did this to me and I want to go back. Like this wasn't, there was no justice in this. It's pretty heartbreaking. So, all right, Carlos, there's so much that you can say is problematic about this movie. We can talk about the soundtrack. We can
Oh,
talk
I
about
don't
the
think
editing.
anything is problematic in a 2023 way. First of all, I was 9 years old in 2004, so when I see shit like this, it immediately reminds me of the "you wouldn't download a car" ads that used to play before DVDs, even before movies, right? Where it's like privacy is not a victimless crime. Those, right? Because it has the same exact editing and the same sound tracking as this movie, right? Where it's like, oh my God, the first like metal needle drop. What's going on with that? Just an absolute headbanger in this movie. Why don't we go over some of the background that I got?
Go for it.
Right?
Yeah, go ahead.
2004, Russia, Molly, as you noted, became the highest grossing Russian film in Russia. When it came out, it had an original budget of $500,000, but it was taken over by a big public channel called Channel One Russia, right? And they boosted the budget to $4 million, which is still pretty modest,
It
I think,
is,
for
yeah.
2004.
And for what they accomplished with this.
I think so. Yeah. There's a few movies in my other movies that came out this year where I think like, oh, well, those look pretty good. They look a little bit better, but then I wonder how much more expensive were they, right? And how much experience were they working with in terms of American studios?
And I
Yes.
think the other thing to compare this to are other Russian movies from the same era. And this is like a light year, like light years more advanced than what Russian movies were in that time period. Like
At the time, yeah. And I felt the Michael Bay influence, and I felt a little bit of like the early 2000s. You know what movie this reminded me of weirdly is Training Day, which I think is 2001, which is a few years earlier, right? But it's grimy and kind of quick like this. In its own sort of way, it has a very different tone, of course, in a very different setting and a very different outlook on who made it and why. Some other facts. It was produced by Russia to be nominated for Best International Feature at the Oscars. It did not get nominated. Sorry,
no, I know,
Molly.
but that cracks me up. That absolutely cracks me up.
Oh, they're always going to push that forward unless it's 2022 and it's RRR, right, Aaron?
Yeah, exactly. There was
the
no
director.
dance scene at this. No, come on.
You know how sick that would have been, though? Like a traditional Russian dancing
There was
scene?
the flipping
Awesome.
truck, though, like the 360 truck.
For no reason. Yeah.
I know.
Because it's
love
awesome.
this movie.
Because it was the early 2000s and you have to have a truck.
You have to have the
flipping
flipping truck. Yeah.
over.
And a bunch of that sped up action, right? Where the car's suddenly going like 4 times the speed of the rest of the, whole early 2000s thing. It's very much of its time, right? Like I could have placed this as 2004 if you hadn't told me. Be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The director was Timur Bekmambetov. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah. But Aaron, he did Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Oh,
Yep. There's a whole through line with you two in this movie. He also did Wanted. Do you guys remember that
No.
movie? That was a big deal
was that with?
for people my age.
Yeah, Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, and a
Yeah.
very young James McAvoy.
Yes, I
Right,
did
that's
see that. I
right.
saw that in the theater.
Bending the bullet. Bending the bullet.
Yeah, that must
Just-
work.
Yeah. He also directed Daywatch, which is the sequel. Molly, have you seen
I
Daywatch?
have not.
Have you read these
Yes.
books that they're based off of? You
Yes,
have.
I have.
Wow. Do you like the movie more or the book more?
The book is far more Russian.
So it's sadder.
It's a lot more philosophical.
Uh,
You know, but the movie just stomps grapes, man.
Yeah. Some of the light reading online of comparing the book to the movie, I found more people liking the movie than the book who have read the book. So that's pretty shocking, I think. I think the book was pretty well read, right? Wasn't it a pretty popular
It was
novel?
yeah.
Yeah. So which probably helped on the whole high grossing thing. Cinematographer was Sergei Trofimov. Don't know any of these people. Let me put that forward first. I don't know any of these people. He did Daywatch. He did a movie that looks great called Mongol. Something called I Am Dragon. This movie that I kept seeing from the crew working on called Black Lightning, which I want to check out because it looks like some sort of dead race car driver, possibly. All of these people who worked on this movie have careers in the Russian film industry. I didn't see a lot of crossover to the American industry except for the director, right? And it seems like American producers saw this movie and like, well, he gets it, right? Like he knows what we're gonna ask him to make, like Wanted and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. As mentioned, it was based off a novel, so the original author gets a writing credit, right, for the story. But it was also written by a woman named Leita Kalogridis, who actually did Shutter Island,
Oh, really?
which I think is really interesting. Yeah, and Alita Battle Angel and Terminator Genesis, which is an Albuquerque
Yeah.
classic, at least, because it was
Yeah.
filmed here in Albuquerque. Yeah. Is that the one where Christian Bale yelled at a guy for eating? No, that was the Family Guy bit. But he yelled at a guy. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The famous Christian Bale recording. He's just tearing into it.
Yeah. What
You
an
know,
ass.
Grip 2, a best boy, doing his best. Anyways, Dmitry Keselev edited it. He also did Daywatch. And Yuri Putinko also did Daywatch. He did the score. And also Black Lightning. So maybe Black Lightning is Aaron's pick for next week, just to keep this
It's like
going.
a Usain Bolt biopic or something. What is that?
I think I would not leave it to the Russian film industry to do Usain Bolt's biopic. I don't think that
They'd
would
call it, yeah. They,
probably go. Yeah, I don't think that'd go well. Other movies from this year, though. Listen to this list. I always do 10.
I'm
right?
sorry.
So-
Can I
Yeah,
just
go ahead, go ahead.
Because this has got to be the Black Lightning that you're talking of. And Aaron, boy, this thing has legs. The description on IMDb says a Moscow college student's gift car from his parents turns out to be more than anyone expects when it flies, which he uses to become both a city guardian and a speedy floral delivery boy.
Nice.
I love the trifecta energy we've built in this chat, right? Where Aaron gets to pivot, where he hears that and he's like, "Oh, that's sick," and I hear that and I'm like, "What happened to us as a civilization?" These are the same people who gave us Stalker, as already dropped by Aaron. Like these movies are similar at all in tone or philosophy.
Targeting a
Like,
demographic
okay.
of delivery drivers, especially and florists. They
Was
need
Stalker-
their art
Oh my
too.
God.
Was Stalker your pick or was Stalker my pick?
Oh, Stalker was definitely your pick.
Okay, that's what I
Yes,
thought.
absolutely, 100,000%. You know, I'm too much of a patriot to pick a USSR era film in this group chat.
I still have like, and
Other movies though.
I can still like hear that movie in my head, which is good. It stays with me. It's like
Yeah, it's beautiful.
in a good way, in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's like a buzzing mosquito.
You see,
It's
it is.
it is, yeah.
And
Landed
unlike
well.
and unlike you, Carlos, I am willing to accept life as it is. Like just
what does that
it
mean?
means that sometimes that there are dark and terrible things, and sometimes that you just can't hide behind ideologies.
Let's get it on the record that I watched Stalker 3 times when we did it for the movie club.
on
So
you.
let's all chill out. Let's all chill
on you.
out.
3 times at regular
All right.
speed?
Regular speed, yeah.
Damn.
Which was sick. It felt like 10 days. Other movies from this year, I think this is exciting to look at this movie compared to some of these, right? So Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind by Michel Gondry. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best Harry Potter. I don't know if you guys have seen that. By Alfonso Cuarón.
Oh, yeah.
Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh my God.
Miyazaki.
Yeah.
Yep. The Incredibles by Brad Bird. Spider-Man 2 by Sam Raimi. Mean Girls by director Mark Waters. But I think we all know it more as the Tina Fey project, right?
Yep.
Kill Bill 2 by Quentin Tarantino, Molly's favorite director. Shrek 2, which has 5 directors, so I didn't label them. Shaun of the Dead by Edgar Wright. One of my favorite movies of like my lifetime, right? Movies that have come out during my lifetime that I can't just be like, yeah, Godfather Part 2 rips. Before Sunset, which we've done in the club, which I know you guys love dearly. So
The second one. That's yeah. Okay.
yes. Yeah. Just to give some perspective on what the American film industry might have looked like at that time, right? But I'll also throw this out there. The opening of this movie, my girlfriend mentioned this, clearly reminds us of the Fellowship of the Ring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, we're going to open with the battle, and a lot of CGI and a lot of clever shooting that way. So definitely felt some Lord of the Ring influence, at least on the opening. Do you guys feel that? No?
I think it's kind of hard to say because I think that again, I think that Russian iconography and storytelling is so vastly different in many ways from the other Western European. So I think there's elements that have completely different like meanings and feelings to them as well too. The stories of Tsarist Russia way back to the beginning, 1,000 years ago. Different feel, kind of like the same types of characters, but a whole kind of different purpose and feeling to a lot of those battles.
Yeah.
I for some reason, just one last thing,
Mhm.
Aaron, and then please jump in. I've always felt like there's big influence from the first Matrix
Mm-hmm.
in this movie.
Gigantic.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's kind of I was going to reference that too. There's a lot of pop culture references in there. It's very kind of audience conscious, I think, in that way. So it's a little bit of a kaleidoscope of different sort of fan type things. And they do it consciously throughout the movie and like the set design and what's going on in the background, but it doesn't stick to a particular motif all the way through. It's a lot of different ones all kind of mashed up, which makes it very, very fun. And it also makes it a little bit confusing and interesting. Um, so yeah, I can see a lot of the influences that come into it from other movies, and I think that's a little bit of a visual cue for people who are fans of movies to kind of be triggered at those particular moments to have those feelings that they had when they were watching all those other movies.
Mhm. In that way, it kind of reminds me of RRR, where I felt like that there were layers of cultural references in there. We had that discussion also of it's huge and so forth, absolutely beloved outside of typical, you know, white American circles, even though it's loved by lots of white American circles. But just that recognition that there's probably a lot of other cultural references in there that we weren't even picking up on
Probably
because
not. Yeah.
we are just not part of that conversation. Um, but you're right. I think that there's like these layers upon layers upon layers in this particular movie that are just
And
crazy.
these people sort of
Yeah.
and the main characters in it, the others, they exist in sort of this side world that's not quite our own. It's kind of a reflection of our world. So it kind of fits with their experience too, as it's portrayed in the movie, where
Hmm.
they're kind of witnessing bursts of what's going on in the real world and not necessarily kind of living in there naturally and presently.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a grunginess to this one again, kind of like we last week we watched The Organizer, and I think that we all really kind of appreciated um
Similar movies for people who haven't seen The
Wait a minute, I
Organizer. They're
was
very
this
similar.
wasn't the sequel?
uh, well, yeah, but the feel, like as opposed to something like The Matrix, which is kind of manufactured uh dystopia, like this actually has a far more grungy feel. In some ways, like choosing an actual butcher shop, you know. Um, I liked the scene with the elevator, and they spent just an awful lot of time, just like you just watch the gears. And why do you watch the gears? Because pretty soon they're going to burn the fuck out of those gears, and it's important that you like kind of understand that this is, it's a real life mechanical world. There's magical stuff that happens, but there's magical stuff that ends up destroying the literal, wheels and bolts of the world that they're living in. Yeah, very simple things also, like when the vortex is lifted and the power comes back on, you get little flashes of lightning, and you're seeing like all the lights popping up on all the buildings, but in the flashes you still see that there's that bridge and the guys that are battling on that bridge in the middle of the city, and all of the crows that are flying around that nobody seems to notice, and it's just a flash, but dig it.
Mm.
Molly, I wonder if that has something to do with, you're saying about the stories we tell about ourselves, right? How Russian influence this movie is, right? Especially modern Russian history, because filmmakers are going to bring what their lived experience is to
Mhm.
that sort of thing, right? And you said manufactured dystopia of The Matrix, right? Which I love. I don't think it's a hot take to be like, The Matrix has cool production design, right?
Mhm.
Um, but there does feel like some sort of conversation with American action films
Oh yeah.
within the Matrix. And while I don't feel a conversation with American action films in this movie, I see a clear influence in some of the shooting, right? And some of the sort of angles and the colors, right? Big colors. There's a lot of blue in this final third of this movie, a lot of blues, which is great. I love that kind of big swing stuff, right? When it mixes with the production design they included, it's sort of like, I don't know, a like Russian theater group's take on some small American play. You know what I mean? Where they're
Oh
only
yeah.
using their lived experience to create this thing while still using a Russian story, right? Like, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on how maybe the modern history of Russia maybe influenced some of the philosophy and psychology of the characters in this story, right? Because I think that's something I'm still trying to work out, right?
Yeah.
Is the Russian influence.
Well, and Aaron, I want to hear your thoughts on it. But like my take, I was a Russophile for quite a while, and I think that I still am. And you're talking about modern Russian history, but my feeling is that Russia has never been post-Tsarist. I think that that is still very much how that they perceive themselves, and how that they view culture and the relationship between the average person and the people with power. I feel like all of the political structures are overlays to this kind of cultural Russia that really hasn't changed for 4,000 years by and large. And I think that you see it in the art. I think that you see it in the stories. I think that Pushkin would have very much appreciated this story as well too. There's like echoes in the futility of assuming that your life is going to be anything but brutal that we saw in Stalker as well. you know, that you are here, but you will be used in the same way that cattle is used. And I think that that continues to be a very kind of a Russian feeling, you know.
Yeah, that's
Most of us are here to serve the purpose of somebody else that imposes that their needs on your life. You know, so it goes.
yeah, that's a perfect description. And it really felt that way. And it felt like, yeah, there was some sort of a force that was kind of guiding everything that was going on, and then everyone else was just kind of existing in a slightly off phase from that force, kind of existing in the same space, but not necessarily interacting. But one had some sort of control or dominion over the other. Um, which it was about 10 years, I think, after the Soviet Union fell apart when this Soviet Union came apart in 93, I think. Um, So, and after that, I'm sure they had a whole flood of different pop culture stuff coming in that might have been hard to get their hands on. Um, a little bit more exposure and a little bit less restriction. So I think, having the influence of being not only exposed to more Western culture, but also being able to participate a little bit more. Um, it shows a lot in this movie. But there's lots of references to insects in this, which I thought was interesting. The mosquitoes kind of make this sort of separate vibration that creates an entirely different world. There's scads and scads of cockroaches that just kind of exist in the walls. You don't really see them interacting with the people so much, and then you have these weird spider creatures that burst out of nowhere. So it's almost like there's that whole insect world that goes on with us humans, and the humans in this movie are almost insects compared to these others who are really kind of pulling the
It's
strings.
yeah, it's like another little whole universe, right? That like doesn't even get acknowledged by
Mhm.
some higher universe, like you're saying. And also mosquitoes, bloodsuckers. I too have read books. I'm with you guys.
Yeah.
I too can see symbols.
Yeah. Okay. So two things, and one just because I had forgotten it. A little factoid that I don't think that I have been brave enough to share with the two of you in the past is that I do have a nose fetish, and so Constantine, I
Yikes.
can't think of his. I do. My gosh, noses are
Yikes.
beautiful,
Out of pocket.
absolutely beautiful,
Waited to start
completely.
recording
But
to drop this.
it's taken me what, like it's taken me years
Yeah,
to feel this vulnerable and safe with the two
is it
of you, and
fetish level?
here
Because
we
that's
have the
loaded
moment.
term. Is it like aficionado? Or are you a great fan of noses? Are you a
It's
collector?
you know me well enough to know that I know what fetish is.
Okay,
Look,
all
look,
right.
All of the obligation that goes with fetish. It is a nose fetish.
look, I don't
Um,
think mine is perfectly there, but I do have some of a Roman nose. So I will take that.
mhm.
I will take that.
You both have exquisite noses. So Constantine, the actor that plays Anton, gorgeous nose, absolutely lickable. So and the other thing that I wanted to like, what do you guys think of Olga,
Olga
like the
the Owl?
character
Oh my
Olga?
God. Such a good character. Yeah.
Because like they don't explain, right? Which I love. They don't
Hmm.
explain why she was cast and put on a shelf for 60 years, do they?
Yeah, I know, right?
Not really, but we got to discuss the line between show and tell and here's a random thing for you to just have, right? Because I think it is a fine line. I think we're all David Lynch fans and we all feel that sometimes he's just throwing things in films for taste, for flavor, right? Where it's like, oh, this just feels a certain way. And if it's included in your mental montage of what's happening, it adds a certain flavor to it, right? So I think in that case, it works in this movie. In other cases, I'm like, this feels like Chekhov's gun that you brought this up and then you cut it from the final edit in the third act to mean anything. It's just in here to just be in here. But that's a fine line to walk, right? And I don't think every screenplay should be everything that's in the first act shows up in the third. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it should be there. But this movie certainly has a lot of what you're saying, which is here's this thing, deal with it, right? There's a lot of like, just go with it. And Molly, we had recently lightly discussed a movie you haven't seen yet, Beau is Afraid. right? And
Right.
there was a lot of talk about directors and writers having contempt for their audience. I do not think this movie has contempt for its audience when it's like, hey, here's a thing
No.
I'm not going to explain, versus other movies where like, here's the thing I'm not going to explain and fuck you for trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, so I think this movie walks that line, but that line does exist
Yeah, I
to
think.
incomprehensibility. Because I'll go ahead.
Oh, yeah, the difference between mystery and confusion. These things don't
Yeah.
seem out of place in this world, so you can kind of go along with it without it being too jarring. But
Hmm.
and it is also kind of beautiful to look at. It's not just a
Yeah.
weird thing. It actually is a gorgeously put together scene and a gorgeously put together effect. So that in and of itself, if it's out of place, at least it wasn't, to the detriment of the time you spent watching it because it was really kind of a
Right.
beautiful piece.
It is. Yeah. So like when the unveiling of Olga, I think is gorgeous. And
Mhm.
again, really close shots. Um, and I want to revisit some of these movies that we have watched recently that take advantage of it. I think again, the organizer did a great job with those really compact shots as well too. I think that we've kind of moved, modern movies have moved away from that quite a bit. I think I've talked about some of the movies that like look like they come out of, like glossy photography magazines, but feel empty. This is
Yeah.
exactly the opposite of it. Um, Again, like this reminds me of when I have traveled overseas or like when I've traveled to interesting places in the country and you show up and you meet one person and like you've got to Costa Rica and I got to get over the mountain and the guy that I'm at the hostel owner says, yeah, I know the bus has already left, but my cousin can take you over there, and so you meet the cousin and then you get on the back of the motorcycle. And at some point the cousin says, like, I've got to stop over here,
Mhm.
on the way over. And you go to the back of some sort of, like shoe repair shop and he talks to somebody in a language that you don't understand and he picks up a package and goes back on and says, well, I have to stop by my grandmother's on the way home. Like, you don't know.
Mhm.
Like, you just don't know what the backstory is, but you have to kind of trust these people, you know, and you are thrown in the middle of their story. But like you learn a lot about Olga later on when she's taking care of Yegor, and she's very kind of caring and sews on the button and things like that. So you learn an awful lot about her personality without ever learning anything about her backstory. And to me, that's okay. That's almost like real life in a lot of
I like how
ways.
she asks if the clothes are still in fashion.
I know,
Super charming. I love it.
I
Which who the hell knows? Because it's like
know.
three different kinds of fashions all matched up. So
Right, right.
Mm.
So, I mean, like, but did you find yourself having affection for her, even if you didn't learn why she's literally been in a box for 60 years, what her crime was?
There was a little bit right at the beginning when she's becoming human, transitioning back from being an owl, where she's saying, "Don't look at me, don't look at me," and
Mhm.
I mean, it's something that probably all the other people that she's associated with have maybe seen or they know shape shifting. It's not like a weird thing, but she feels like it's almost like she's self conscious about it. Not that she's trying
Mhm.
to hide anything that she does not want to have Anton know. It sounds like real kind of vulnerability. So the character sort of starts out that way. Well, it starts out as a little stuffed owl that they throw around. So you can't get much more vulnerable than an owl in a plastic bag. But yeah, I think that it starts out that way, and then she really wants a shower, and then she can't figure out the soap, and then like the clothes she's unsure about whether or not they look good. So it's a lot of this kind of vulnerability, but she's extremely aware of what's going on around her, and extremely self-sufficient in her own right, and
Capable.
yeah, very capable in that space that she occupies, which is that supernatural space. But it's great.
Yeah.
It's still has that sort of the human kind of social vulnerability that's very endearing.
I was,
Totally. I mean, you guys hopefully know by this point that the number one thing a film should do is it should not leave anybody completely confused as to what the hell is happening.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Admittedly, I was a little confused as to motives why people are doing what they're doing, why bonkers shit keeps happening and nobody says anything, which I think is part of the plan, right? The directing plan here
Yeah.
is that this is not bonkers to these characters, right? Like that should be normal, right? Like we see it all the time in war movies, like formally battle war movies, right? Where like disgusting, unimaginable things happen in front of war-tired veterans, and they just kind of take it, and that's part of the filmmaking practice, you know? So I think that's part of the movie. So I forgave it when I was watching the movie that would happen. The owl stuff is just sick because I like owls. So I'll just say that right off the top.
Yeah.
But the transformation scene, I mean, this movie does its most with its budget. Right. It's not, we talked about Prisoner of Azkaban being the best Harry Potter film. And I think a big part of that is Cuarón actually sparingly uses CGI because I think he intimately knows that it probably looks like trash when you do those wide shots, Molly. So you can't do them too much or else it has to look really good. Right. It has to look like Avatar 2,
Right.
which this movie had literally the fraction of a budget. This one, it really knew what to do in terms of its close-ups during these kinds of sequences, right? Now, paired with the editing style, your mileage is gonna vary whether you like that or not, because it's pretty assaulting. No,
It really is. It's a chaos.
It jumps
It's-
back and forth between different types of editing, and then I think it's kind of cool. There's sort of that kaleidoscopic, impressionistic, almost like a music video sort of editing where it's flashes and movements, and it just drags your eye all over the screen, but doesn't actually necessarily focus it anywhere. And then there's other ones that are really very particular about how they assemble the shots in a meaningful way so that you can really follow the action well.
I'm so glad you said music video.
Yeah.
This just reminded me so much of watching music videos on VH1 around this time, right? Or MTV. The whole like Korn music video style, like new metal in general, was just like a lot of whipping around, a lot of quick transitions.
Yeah.
And those sequences had that, like the owl sequence, right? Or the sequence with the boy where they're like going into the apartment, right? And the boy has like this just white makeup all over his face, and it's super impressionistic. That's the term I have written down here in my notes for that entire sequence. It's just like, oh, they're just going all out, but at least I can forgive it that it clearly looks well directed and that this was the plan. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think a lot of this movie was poorly directed and that it felt accidental or wrong. Those parts seemed intentional. You know what I mean? So you can forgive them in those sequences.
Yes, and I agree with you. And I think the soundtrack kind of does the same thing. I mean, there is an aspect to this movie which is no fucks given. You know, like they will just the transition from types of music is brutal and fast, and either you keep up, either you can deal with it, you can hang, or you can't. And we've talked an awful lot about different aspects of the special effects. I'm going to just go back and say, like at the beginning, that very early scene where you see Tiger Girl actually transform into a tiger, and it's that fast for all of that money. But like, whoa, like it's good. They don't need to play any of this stuff up, even when Olga changes, which is completely all practical effects. You know, it's just the close up and like gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous stuff, but they don't need to turn it into a set piece. To a large extent, the special effects are there to make you feel, and you don't have to linger on it. And yet at the same time, also when they are trying to save Yegor, like some of that is just as simple as a completely black room with like two spots, super bright in just a few spaces, and everything else is completely blacked out. And it gives you all of the feel that you need for just how kind of isolated and alone and kind of underwater that they are in this moment. You know, that they're divorced from reality and they're in this crucial moment. No special effects other than, again, black background, two spots.
And it is really enough
Carefully
because I
placed.
think because the audience is very familiar with that sort of thing. Whereas if you have a CGI environment or you have something that's visually very non-natural, it's not really relatable, but you have a lot of relatable elements to an audience, and I think that can
Mhm.
they can imagine themselves in that room with that light, with the wind going through their hair and the buzzing around them. And I think because of the relatability of that, it's a little bit easier for the audience to kind of get absorbed, as opposed to being try to be pulled in by something
Mhm.
flashy.
Yeah.
One scene that I really liked, that I thought the editing was spectacular, and it really is like a very practical, very easy special effect, was the scene in the beginning with the witch, where um you're it's a setup for the magic, and it's explained as a story. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clap my hands and a baby's going to die very far away. So they set all this up, and then there's this drink that she puts together with blood and vodka and whatever else is in there, and that's kind of the magic potion, and it's all they need to do is, what are you going to say, Carlos?
Lemonade. You can't forget the lemonade. I had it before this meeting. That concoction.
little
I feel
little
terrible.
Russian lemonade. um
Whose blood?
Of course, mine.
Okay.
oh, whatever. um anyway, so and you don't need to set anything up beyond just, oh, it's a magic potion, and it doesn't matter what they throw in there. He drinks it, he gets a little loopy, and then the magic starts, and it is just cross cutting back and forth between her, creaky little hands clutching and twisting and doing things, and then a woman in agony, just intercut back and forth. And that's such a gut wrenching scene, because you have been set up that a child is being murdered, but all it really is, there's nothing to it more than just cutting between fists twisting and woman writhing on the ground, and it's really potent, and really really dark and tragic. But I love it. You don't need a lot of special effects for it.
Mhm.
I totally agree. And, I think it's clearly a grabber scene. And like we're saying, in terms of the retrofuturism, Aaron, is a term I guess I've heard that you mentioned kind of earlier, explaining it, which is like it feels so old, but they have like this technology that's so futuristic, right? Or it's like, oh, what is that? Like they have this PS2 game, which by 2004 we had PS2 games that were a little bit smarter than that, right? So all right, but I love how in that scene he has just an awful wig, or unless that's his actual hair, then my brother in Christ. Um, but you're totally right? And that all those aspects of that scene worked way better for me than suddenly she's a tiger, right? Like I had seen a poster during the Molly, I had seen a poster during the research for this movie where it's like a face yelling, right? And there's tigers screaming in the eyes. Have you seen that one? Sick, sick. So I thought tigers were going to play more of a part in this movie. They did not. I was a little bit disappointed by that.
That was kind of a bummer. That's the only time you see it happen. And they have this whole bear guy. You never see him turn into a bear.
Which
So
I don't know. Maybe it's just smart franchise building. It's like the Beast Wars is number 7, like
maybe.
Transformers, But I thought the sort of old school, and it's not this, but high sci-fi way of doing that, right? Of her having a miscarriage, and like you're saying, these planned shots in between this whole segment, right? That felt like something that was truly storyboarded to be a very
Mhm.
filmic thing, and it worked just completely for me, right? And it was one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, which it's great to have that in the opening, right? Kind of a bummer to have that in the opening and then
Yeah.
be lost for 30 minutes like I was, where I'm like, so it was pig's blood, what's going on, so love that part.
The mirror fight also, he's having the fight with the
Yeah.
hairdresser, which is awesome, that he has this kind of martial art with scissors that he does, and he's a hairdresser. That's very cool. That's very kind of early 2000s cool. That's their weapon of choice. Like he's a samurai with it. But they also the things with the mirror in it, and you learn the rules of what's going on while they're playing out this fight scene. You'll learn about what the lights were supposed to be for. Different spectrums of lights will burn, different others in different ways. You learn that they can transmit back and forth between this other realm. They can get sent back there. jerked out of it involuntarily. You learn about the mirror thing, and then these mirrors coming into this fight, and the him holding up the mirror close to his face so he could look around to see where his adversary is. It's not only kind of a cool science fiction sort of fantasy thing of vampires or whatever going defying that sort of light physics, but it's just a really cool setup for a fight scene where you have like this two images of a person's face that are moving around while the camera's moving, and it's just a really cool thing to watch, and to see the action going on
Yeah.
around it.
It,
um,
no, and
Go
I
ahead.
think it also does a great job of showing you the fear that Anton is feeling as well too. So not only is that a prop for the mythical action that's happening, it's a great movie making way of allowing you to track the emotions of the character as they're moving through this space as well too. I mean, it does lots of different
Yeah.
work in there to great effect.
There's the graphic element of that, of having that sort of fractured face. It over dramatic dramatizes the what's going on the face. You focus on it. So yeah, you're right. It really does that. There's a couple other scenes in the movie where Anton is seen upside down. There's once where he's going into a trance, some sort of trance, and the other person is facing the other direction, and then there's another one where his face graphically on the screen is upside down, his son's face is right side up. So it's this kind of the theme of the movie where it's these opposing forces, and he's not, he's supposed to be on the light side, but he's not quite right. He's in this imbalance now and again where he's not quite in the world he's supposed
Mhm.
to at any particular point. Not supposed He's not oriented in the way that he that makes him comfortable,
Yeah,
and
well,
it puts him in peril throughout it.
it does, and he seems to be very uncomfortable. He does what he's asked to do, and like there's like a little throwaway lines like "Make sure you get the right light bulb this time," and it's not, and it's not Harry Potter esque. You go into the room of revelation, and it's not gorgeous. He's got like a little fucking shoebox, and they're all kind of bouncing around in there and things like that, and
Yeah.
he's digging, but like his buddy, like the kid that lives across the hall, is this teenager who's a vampire, and he's just as comfortable hanging out with that kid. And he doesn't seem to recognize that he has power over this his neighbors, you know, and it's the father that kind of says like, that they kill us, like why did you bring him here? So Anton doesn't buy into the adversarial thing. I think he's just, an alcoholic and he's doing what he's supposed to and he's just trying to get along as best as possible. Well, I'm
he's
going to say
he's
one.
yeah well
Go
he's
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, no, please, please, please.
Okay, yeah, no, no, two things. On one thing, Carlos, that's something that you said has been rattling in my head. But then there's like these other forces, despite all of this like incredible stuff. When he's trying to track down Igor and he's on the metro and he comes out and a fucking policeman stops him, like, and can ask for his papers and stuff like that. So he has the power of the others, and yet he's just as much of a pawn as anybody else there. It's
Mm.
just the Soviet police can stop him and detain him because he looks like he's drunk. So there's all of these forces of power, and he's really in his own way, even though he's an other, he's still bottom rung with this stuff. Um, Carlos, one other thought that you were talking about being lost and not having things explained, and you talked about war movies. And I think that you're right. I think I had shared with you many weeks ago when we were watching The Last of Us, Craig Mazin's comment about when he had the Diva Cups in there. And there was like an interview that I read with him. And he said, like, other than making the logo a little larger on that sheet of paper, um, no explanation. He said, like, because like we've spent an entire lifetime watching war movies and nobody explains what it's, what it means to take a safety off, or how to like load a pistol, or what those sounds are, that you have to just learn as you go along. And that's kind of what life is. So that lack of explanation, I think I've become more of a fan of. And again, and I think that's what this movie does an awful lot of, that you kind of have to, it's like being a kid, you know?
See, I push back
Go ahead.
because diva cups are something that I have quickly found out 50% of the population absolutely does know what that is, right? They don't need an explanation for that. I think about a lot of the most revered war movies, and they follow the general story idea that why don't our characters poop, right? It's like, why don't we ever see them turn the safety off? It's like, well, it's not really important to getting what's happening in this scene, right? I think that's very different from explaining motivation, explaining character relationships. I do think the movie does come around to those things. I don't think they just leave you
Okay.
lost forever, right? But let's not act like that I appreciate what we're saying, that they still exist in the real world, right? Versus which is a very good remark, which is that in Harry Potter, there's a little bit too much of the I am Lord Voldemort kind of stuff, right? Where it's like, oh, you got to literally spell this out because this is for, 8 to 15-year-olds, right? Who might actually just be confused. It does take place in the real world, absolutely. But when you're trying to explain these high fantasy sort of things, I do think, unfortunately, you do have to spend a little bit extra time kind of, let's have the exposition scene, right? Like, let's have the slowdown scene and converse, explain one-on-one. This is just my perspective, right? As somebody, and I think that's why I bring to the conversations about these kinds of movies is I'm not a fantasy fan, right? Like a lot of the movies I enjoy are like, he's a man and he's upset. You don't really need to know more than that.
And he's upset at another man who's upset at him.
Yeah, which are very important character interactions, I guess. This movie does not leave you in the lurch forever. I want to make that clear, right? You eventually figure out what's going on and sort of get the momentum happening. So,
And it's the world is kind of seen through a soda straw by the audience and by the characters too. So it's things left unexplained. You can give them a pass in this, and also there is a deeper mystery going on than what this blonde woman who's creating this sort of despair vortex. She is part of what is driving the motivation of the characters in the movie, but there is a whole other thing that's going on underneath that you don't necessarily realize until the very end. So it's a little bit of it kind of blossoms at the end and you see what's going on. But yeah, all the way along through it, you're piecing it together like a puzzle. And they're not giving it to you in a step 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. The way that you describe it, I'm trying to remember what story it was. I'm sure that this is a device you guys are familiar with. Sometimes in movies, but frequently in books. Like you've got an individual that's been um, grievously injured, and everybody is working to like staunch the bleeding in the arm, and it's only near the end of the scene that you find out that they actually have, like the back of their skull has been punctured,
Oh,
and
right, yeah.
so, and like that's how this movie ends up playing out, that you think that the wound is in one place, but there's something completely different that has already caused the whole situation to just, you know,
Yeah.
die
Like the
at the end of it.
like the guy worried about his sausages exploding and then the entire power plant blows up.
Right.
that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Hey, before we go any further, let's talk subtitles because Molly, this was huge for you with this movie. Aaron.
What you guys think?
I think this was like participating in kind of Western culture. I think there was an enthusiasm about putting in these English subtitles that did all kinds of crazy, weird stuff, and it was a little bit out of the norm. But it was kind of a thing that I think they felt was going to be necessary in order for this to have a broader success than just inside Russia. Is it's going to have to be either dubbed or subtitled, and they had fun with it. They didn't just kind of hand it over to some sort of a studio and say, "Hey, slap some subtitles on here. They actually took a little bit of time to make it interesting and engaging for the audience. And I think it's a part of the other way of this being very audience conscious, because if you're making your subtitles move around like that, subtitles in general are going to kind of take people a little bit away from what's going on in the movie, kind of snap them back into reality a little bit when they have to read along. So they draw them in a little bit more to what's going on by making them kind of fit what's going on in the scene a little bit more. It's almost like music, a music track that goes over a scene that, it's not something, it's not, the diegetic movie music that's going on directly in the scene. It's just some sort of a music track that might be going on if there's a sad scene or a dramatic scene or something like that. But it evens out the sound, and it also kind of accentuates the drama.
Yeah, there was a quote that I was able to find easily from the director where he said, "We thought of the subtitles as another character in the film, another way to tell the story." Right. So, Aaron, I think you're absolutely correct that there was a commercial sort of view from it, probably from a producer, right, who gave the director go ahead to even have that kind of say, because he was there doing the subtitle producing with whoever does that in the post-production process, which usually they don't. I think subtitles by and large are compliant with accessibility requirements, not seen as part of the filmmaking process, which I can see both perspectives as to why that's so cool to do it differently. I can see the other perspective that a lot of international cinemas that we end up seeing here in America is not totally sold as like an American product, right? It's sold as a product within their own country. And they assume the same way Americans assume, I don't want to go see Across the Spider-Verse and have subtitles. I already speak English and I already understand English. Same way French directors likely would say, well, I'm not going to specialize my subtitles for Americans because fuck them. I do think.
Did you guys like them?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I thought it made for a really enjoyable experience. All I'm trying to say is I would not bank on this becoming normal habit amongst international cinema makers.
Yeah. Well, no, and I've never seen anything like it since then. It completely, 2004, and it did. I don't know that I would consider it another character, but simple things like when the vampire girl is calling to him and he's swimming in the water, and it like dissolves and so forth. I mean, I would love to see more of that. And you could do both, right? So you could have the artistic, the movie subtitles, or if you needed it for ADA reasons, that you could just flip the subtitles over to just the standard white and so forth. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, because some of the subtitles were in different places on the screen, right? If I remember correctly. A, B, they flash when Olga blinks in that one interaction from behind him, right? That shot, which is very owl-esque, right? There's moments where the character's hand goes behind them, and then they do something again and wipe it away like a windshield wiper, which are all really interesting and really great. Like I said, I think captions for the most part, first of all, producers probably in studios probably do not allow directors to have any creative input on ADA accessibility things, right? Where they're like, no, we have to do this for people who are deaf, right? Or hard of hearing. This isn't a creative aspect. I don't want to spend any more money thinking about it that way. But it's deeply interesting if you have a story where it makes sense. Like if you understand Russian, I don't know what the subtitles would add for them other than the color of it, right? Because now you're just reading it. And it has the colors and it has the mixture with the blend stuff. But did they do that in Russia? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah.
As far as I know, this was only for the international edition of this movie. And my feeling is in the same way that they submitted this for the best foreign film for the Oscars, that this is a showcase. At that particular time in 2004, this was a showcase movie co-produced by Russia One Television to show what Russia could do And I think that that is
Mhm.
why that they did that. It was because they one of the first Russian movies that got international distribution. Um, first type of kind of, I don't say high concept, but like high action, Matrix esque kind of a movie.
I watched both versions. I watched the version. It wasn't a Voodoo, it was on Amazon, but it was the version with the Russian language, and it had the English subtitles that had all the crazy stuff going on with it. And then I also watched the dub version
Mhm.
that had it. I had the normal subtitles on, which was interesting, and it really matched up really well because a lot of times you see movies that are both dubbed or subtitled, and the dubbing is designed to match up with the lips moving, so they're going to change the language a little bit and how things are expressed. Um, and then also the subtitling is going to, typically they keep it pretty succinct and they try to translate it as well as they can. So all those things don't necessarily all match up, but in this one they really matched up really well. In terms of the original Russian, I don't know, but it's impressive when you can have subtitling and dubbing that match up almost, word for word in both versions. So that was kind of good to see.
Yeah, that is impressive. If we ever get around to the heroic trio, holy cow, everybody, you got
Mhm.
to watch it with both the dubs and the subtitles simultaneously
That's all over the
because
place. Yeah.
they're two separate movies. They are two separate
Yeah.
movies.
Before we move from subtitles, I did recently see Bert Kreischer's The Machine, right? Which takes place in Russia. I don't think it actually was shot in Russia. They do some fun stuff with the captions there as well. Because I mean, the main characters speak English, but the Russian characters speak Russian. And when they're doing that, and they show that there's some weird lettering and some kind of fitting into the background kind of stuff that they do, but I don't think it has anything to do with the theme of what they're saying. You know what I mean? I don't think the movie's saying anything. So
There's a lot of movies that do like some irreverent sort of subtitling and titling. Um, but it's meant in sort of a fun way. I think with this movie, because it is consciously a mashup of pop culture language. It fits really well, and it is, I think, fun for the audience to kind of be part of the, I don't know, the reference,
totally,
basically.
totally. Should we move into final thoughts? Anybody
We can move into
have any
final
big ones they want
thoughts.
to talk about? I mean, my biggest thing that I want to bring up is that I wonder how much of this script they retrofitted to a small budget, right? Because the original budget was a quarter of what it ended up being, or even smaller, right? An eighth, 500,000, right? If I'm doing that math right. So, I have a note here about I love some of the exteriors that they're getting are so grimy, Molly. Like you said, they're a little grunge. And I think that just fits into what they were getting at in terms of budget, right? Because films really
Mhm.
should write to their budget or be produced and shot to their budget. I think of, and I had to look it up to make sure, Saw came out in 2004, which I think is a huge independent American film in terms of, oh, yeah, this genre can always be cheap and almost always should be cheap because it looks better than all the rest of the Saws put together. I don't know if you guys have kept up with the Saw franchise, but
I haven't, I know.
they start looking worse. Um, in this movie, it's so cheap. The only place where it feels like its budget is the opening battle scene,
Yeah.
right? And it's only when they zoom out. Once they're close up and they're in mediums and blah, 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 it never feels bad. For me, as soon as it zoomed out of the battle and was kind of flying away, I was like, oh, that's like 30 dudes, like on a bridge somewhere, like it completely dropped the veil. Everything else, I loved how it looked. Molly, you mentioned the apartment designs. I mean, wallpaper just goes so far. It
Oh
helps.
God, yeah,
You got to have wallpaper.
luscious. And I don't know if that's. I was thinking about it. I can interrupt real quick.
Please, please.
Between the Soviet and the movie takes place. It starts in 1992, and then it jumps ahead. So it's Soviet, and then it's post-Soviet. But a lot of the design choices, just in terms of what they have around them,
Mhm.
their haircuts, fashions, and yeah, the wallpaper. And I don't know if this was. It's probably much more meaningful for people in Russia who's gone through the transition from a communist country into a capitalist. or quasi-capitalist. But I'm sure that that makes a big difference, and it's just so it's just a touch off of what we're used to here. So it makes it, it's familiar, but it's a little, the fashion is something that you can't really place.
Mhm.
Absolutely, yeah. And I looked it up during the movie because I had to remember, right? But it is 1991, the very, very end of 1991, December 26th. If you look up on Google, at least, the official end of the USSR, it's December 26th, 1991. So when you say 1992, that's pretty loaded, right? That's like saying he woke up today and it's September 10th, 2001, right? It's like, oh, so it's like framed during
Okay.
a special time.
Yeah.
At least that was my
Yes.
perspective for what you're saying, right? Which it's like, oh, 1992 is when it starts in terms of the kind of countries kind of starting over in a way, philosophically,
Hmm.
mentally, right? And now we're 12 years later for whatever reason. Who knows why it's 12 years later, other than the movie needs to take place in 2004 because this movie comes out in 2004, right? So I think I would have to watch it again and not worry about what's happening to love it. Does that make sense? Right? Because the first time you're watching a movie, like we watched The Organizer last week, and I didn't have to worry so much about the machinations of the plot during The Organizer that I could laugh at it more
Right.
and found it way funnier,
Yeah.
right? Because now I'm relaxed a little bit. If I rewatch this movie with somebody, I'm more like, yeah, she just turns into a tiger. And I'm not telling you if it happens again. You'll be disappointed on your own.
Vodka helps. Like second
Yeah,
watch of
Molly, you
vodka helps.
you called him an alcoholic. I'm like, I don't think there's evidence he's an alcoholic. I think there's evidence he's just a middle-aged Russian man.
Well, when
That's my
he's
joke.
reading over, yeah,
Joke.
okay, yeah, but when
Joke.
he reads over his little dossier, and they talk about, and he's always walking around with the flask, and he's waking up, and he looks hungover and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I think as long as your expectations for this movie are just simply, like sit back and just do stuff to my head, it's a great movie. It's a
I
great
I
movie.
have one last shout out, and
Yes.
it's the driver. His name is Simeon.
Mm-hmm.
My last name is Simeon, so it was always weird to hear it in a deep accent, right? And without the last D, which is so common. So whatever. That was my last shout out. So
Cool. Yeah.
good movie. Good
All
movie.
right.
One thumb up.
Again, and I'll have to go back and just kind of watch it, even maybe without the soundtrack. What they managed to do to tell you so much about the characters, um, just by how they populate the truck and the apartments and the houses with things. Again, I just feel like in some ways that this is a masterclass in show don't tell. Um,
Yeah.
you get dropped into a foreign country with a whole group of people that have kind of their um, interpersonal relationships all worked out, and you're kind of at their mercy. And hopefully, you can figure out, like who has the powers to do what in these different situations. I think it's a fun ride. I think this movie is just balls to the wall fun.
Mm.
Aaron,
Let me give my final thought.
please.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the movie is super entertaining, and it's really accessible to anyone. I watched it with my wife. Actually, she loved it, and I think even if you're not in this sort of movie, it's really something that's anyone can really enjoy, even if they're not into this genre. There's a little bit of grossness in it, so it might turn off a few people. But I liked the theme of the characters who are supposed to be the good ones, and they have been corrupted somehow without the knowledge that the bad decisions that they made were going to have much bigger consequences than they expected because they're much more powerful than they knew they were. So they kind of come to find out that that is the case, and the good characters are not necessarily, pure. They are corrupted and they're aspiring to be good. So it's a really kind of interesting morality thing. Um, but yeah, I thought it was a awesome pick.
Cool. And I mean, the other thing that we usually do is, would you recommend this to someone else?
Yes.
Yeah. And obviously, I would as well too. This is a fun one for me. Carlos?
Well, starters, my barometer is my family. Would anybody in my family like this? I don't think so. My girlfriend was very confused and I really truly don't think for the vast majority of watchers of anything, being 30 minutes into something, if you're confused, is probably going to lose a lot of people, right? Because that's that mark of like, am I going to continue with this or not? Especially now versus being in a theater.
Right.
That being said, I would definitely give this to somebody like some of my friends who like action movies or who grew up around the same time I did. They'd probably find it pretty fun, right?
So to that last point about 30 minutes in and being confused, I'm going to pull in Mrs. Davis.
Here we go.
As you guys know, I loved.
How much are they paying you? Announce on the pod how much they're paying
nothing.
you.
Bing, bing, bing.
Yep.
You're doing this for free?
Again,
No,
I am doing it again.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But like, it's bonkers. 30 minutes in, you still have no idea what's going on, but there is an internal logic that the filmmakers have done good work to establish. And there is, and all of the actors are all in on it. And just as, like with comedy works when you have actors that take their characters seriously. If you do the nudge and the wink, it doesn't come off well. But I think that this movie does both of those things. I think there actually is an internal logic that is well thought out, as opposed to, let's say, Cowboys versus Aliens. And like, all of the actors do a great job, and I think the director as well too, is to 100% commit to the logic of the world, to the characters, and to the things that they are feeling and experiencing. And I think that it carries it.
And it's kind of a serious movie and a not serious movie at the same time, which is kind of fun. But you know what this has that Mrs. Davis doesn't?
Blood.
A spine sword.
It has a spine sword.
It has a Cronado in it.
It has a Cronado.
It's got little spider dolls.
Spider dolls. I know, the whole thing is just fabulous. And it's a huge allegory also for, the Cold War.
Yep.
That normal people get sacrificed to maintain a balance of power.
Right.
Yeah. I was waiting for somebody to make this take, right? This sort of, it's reflective of that, right? A little bit more than, say, Armageddon has anything to do with American politics.
Yeah.
No.
Kind of does. Why don't we train astronauts to drill instead of drillers to be astronauts? Classic American question.
Yeah.
I am waiting for somebody to use that question on their presidential platform.
Well, it's a budget thing. You don't have to pay them as much as an astronaut. Their salaries are astronomical.
Yeah.
All right. Onward. All right. And so, what else did y'all watch this week?
I'm excited. I watched Patterson this week.
Oh God,
Patterson,
Jim Jarmusch, and I'm excited because I know that Carlos is on the fence, and Molly, you are not on the fence. You're firmly on the good side of the fence. No, I liked it. I thought it was really cool. It's one of those cyclical movies that doesn't necessarily have a beginning and end. It takes place in this circle, like inside Llewellyn Davis. So there are things that are happening that they probably will continue to happen. So you can just kind of imagine it. I think one of the guys from Wu-Tang is in it.
Oh yeah,
also, which was kind of fun. I forget.
Say Redman?
I forget which one.
Riz?
I'm sorry?
Redman? Riz?
I don't think it was Redman. No. Oh, we'll look it up. Anyway.
It was really
cool. Yeah. It had it had like poetry all the way through it, which was kind of charming. And it was just very mellow and fun. Really enjoyable, really well shot, and I like Jim Jarmusch's kind of easy style, where you have people that don't necessarily have anything that they're doing in particular. I like the absence of cell phones in it, which was
Mhm.
kind of cool. The main character does not carry one. Um, so you felt very kind of present and grounded in this movie. It was charming as hell. And Adam
Yeah.
Driver's super.
Marvelous. Yeah. I think I discovered it during the pandemic, or maybe I rediscovered it during the pandemic, but it is one of the most gentle movies that I think
Mm,
I've ever seen. And it's about living. It's not about characters, it's about living. Um, and it just felt good. Adore the soundtrack in it also as well. It's one of the handful of soundtracks that I will listen to just when I'm washing dishes.
I appreciate the experiment a lot. Molly, I think I'm just in a different place. I'm appreciating stories are stories where there things happen that they're the most exciting portions of these people's lives are detailed in this story. Patterson
mhm.
is the opposite. We are detailing the most boring segments of a person's life, which, to your credit, are things that we all do, right? Um, which I totally respect the experiment. Not totally sure if it's totally rewatchable for me or not. I don't want to fire up Patterson when I'm feeling poor, but I could see why others might, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
it might be okay. We could just have a new hobby every week, like his girlfriend in the movie, right? It's Method Man. Method Man
Thank
is in the
you.
movie.
Thank you. All right.
Ah, there you
Yeah.
go.
And I will lastly say, Aaron, it is like Inside Llewyn Davis in the sort of circular fashion, but I think Inside Llewyn Davis is a deeply pessimistic movie that is kind of like, who sucks? Everybody. And Patterson is like, who sucks? Nobody. It's kind of different.
It is, yeah, yeah, yeah. Llewellyn Davis he's trapped in a cycle as opposed to these characters who have found like their perfect harmony that they just kind of drift along, and it doesn't matter if all your life's work gets eaten by the dog.
Nope. Does not. Exactly.
You just start again next week.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Molly, what about you?
Not much else for me this week. I'm still trying to work out a bunch of life stuff, so not a lot of time for extra things. But I did revisit Poker Face. Um, and it does okay. If you ever wanted to see Natasha Lyonne basically be Columbo, which is not a bad pairing, it fits that bill really well. Natasha Lyonne, I think, is just a joy to watch in almost anything
Yeah.
she does.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Carlos, what else did you watch?
yeah.
Watched a little bit of I Think You Should Leave on Netflix.
Mm.
Tim Robinson, is that his name? His sketch comedy show, which is very memeable. Which you guys have probably seen the memes probably before seeing the show. I think it's hilarious. My girlfriend and I were watching it. And then Netflix decided to institute their password sharing lockdown
Oh,
on my screen.
Ooh.
When it asked, am I the primary household? I really should have just said yes. Just dominate the family, I am the primary house. Because that's a thing now, right? That I was sharing the password with my parents, but they're the primary household or
you're all
whatever.
grown up
So
now.
now I'm
You're
kicked
kicked
off.
out of the nest.
I'm all grown up. And I have to somehow explain to her that no, this Bergman movie on a Tuesday night at 9:00 at night on Criterion Channel is more fun than a reality show about where people don't meet each other for a month after talking. So that I did see Across the Spider-Verse,
Oh,
which
Oh, cool.
I think all three of us at some point have talked Into the Spider-Verse at some point, which is
Oh,
the
yeah.
mhm.
first one, which I love a lot. I think it's the best Spider-Man movie.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think I think it's one of those gonna be canonized superhero movies. You know what I mean? Like it's a movie I think is just good on its own that
Mhm.
does the best with the genre. Sort of like, I don't know, The Searchers is for the westerns now, where they're like, hey, watch this for the cinematography of a western. You don't have to watch all the other westerns that came out that year. The same way, I don't think anybody's going to return to Ant-Man 2. You know what I mean? They'll
Ever?
return ever, probably not. Well, are you a big Ant-Man and the Wasp fan, Molly?
No,
Oh,
no.
yeah, exactly. Across the Spider-Verse is very good, though it is part one of a part two thing, and it definitely feels that way. It's a little long in the tooth, but the filmmakers earn your respect and earn your trust in that you really love the set pieces, and then when it gets really quiet and two characters are just speaking honestly to one another, you really trust that it all means something, that you're sitting through stuff for a
Hmm.
reason. And I think it really pays off by the end. I highly recommend it. It's one of the best movies I've seen this year come out in 2023. So big recommend. Big recommend.
Cool. Well, I mean, I've been looking forward to it. It's playing up the street at a little tiny theater. Little
Do it.
tiny theater. I probably will. Um, the first movie, I think that you are right that it will become canon, not just in terms of superhero movies, but it did stuff with film. It did stuff with the translation of graphic novels, of comic books that nobody else has ever tried before. Um, Kind of like a godparent, I think, to everything everywhere, and just saying, um, we get to set the rules of what the visual language can look like.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think they hit the Goldilocks zone there because there were cartoons which were moving versions of comic books, and then they started making the live action movies, which they kind of, it's a conversion into live action. But this is when they start kind of creating its own kind of discrete product and not trying to convert it into an existing art form, which is kind of what they're doing. They're creating an entirely little discrete genre
Yeah.
of sort of
Well,
like action animation.
yeah, but in a way, yes, and like so. But the flip side of that coin also is, like one of the elements of comic books that make a comic book, like the modern comic books, um, are the cells, are the
Mhm.
framing. And a lot of the storytelling is done and how you block the panels on a particular page or what those two-page spreads look like. And you can go right back to Winsor McKay with this stuff. And Little Nemo, he was the first individual that would, like you would have a bed, Little Nemo's in a bed, and then Little Nemo starts to walk, and then the legs of the bed become the frames around the different panels for what happens next. So, like, that is where those rules were just first
Mm.
broken. The first Into the Spider Verse takes that same, we get to like, take almost like takes the negative space, takes those rules and applies it to the actual animation in ways that nobody's ever done before. The thing is just gorgeous and it's courageous. It's amazingly
And it's
courageous.
fun.
And
Uh,
yes, it is. Yeah.
Without giving away too much about this movie's cinematography, it expands completely on everything you guys just said and puts it to a new level, right? Because the first one's great, but it's very contained
Hmm.
in its world, and they kind of get into it a little bit when the other Spider-Men come and other types of spider people come to his world, right? But now that we're going um, across the Spider-Verse, if you will, they go even further with this stuff that we all know as comic book fans, that these things all shouldn't look the same. If that
Right.
was the big draw of comic books, is that you would find artists that you liked,
Mhm.
right? The big draw against what the MCU has done, which is, what if these all look the same and they all look like absolute shit? And it's like, I think you guys ruined one of the big aspects of liking this stuff. No
Yeah.
offense to the
Yeah.
Quantum Mania lovers out there, but it's just incredible. And that's not even talking about the decisions they're making in terms of visual storytelling as a film, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like characters placed in certain places in a scene blocked against one another, which again, I don't think the Marvel movies put a lot of faith into, right? So these just continue to be just amazing. I think this one's really, really good. The only thing I have against it is you sit through 2.5 hours and then you're like, oh, it's not the end. We got two and a
Yeah.
half more hours, So that's the only drawback. But if you like it, then who cares? It's more of stuff
How
to
long is it?
I think it's nearing 2.5 hours. I think
Oh,
it's
all right.
2:15 ish.
Hmm.
What's the runtime? Did you look it
Yeah,
up?
216.
Yeah, yeah. So it's right there, but this is an animated film. It's a superhero film, and that's starting to push the boundaries. So every movie is long now. So I don't know. I think that's it.
That's it.
All right.
Do we know next week's pick that we can record?
No, but we can discuss it. I'm trying to recall that list. There was the list that Molly had come up with a while ago. There was 1991 Crying Game. There's that movie, which I kind of want to see, and I know you suggested it. I actually have never seen it all the way through, so it was something that I was kind of curious about. There was also one on my list that I had sent out to the both of you a while ago.
You had Dark City, Green Knight, Time Crimes, Jackie Brown, Stranger Than Paradise, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, The Mouse That Roared, White Knights, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, My Own Private Idaho, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Genius, The Fly, Cincinnati Kid. And Carlos, didn't at some point you tell us that you've never actually seen like a real Western?
Not one of the old ones.
We saw Johnny Guitar.
That's got to...
Yeah, that counts.
That's well, Johnny Guitar is like David Lynch.
I know.
Doing it's like musical theater. David Lynch doing a Western musical theater. That's Johnny Guitar. You can quote me on that.
Well, have you seen Good, Bad, the Ugly, Carlos?
Nope.
No?
We could do it.
Oh my God, that might have to be it. Let me just read through what I got here. I got my little list here because I had one single movie written down here, and I don't know what prompted me to do this. It was Starship Troopers, which is an interesting movie. It's not a great movie. It's not high cinema, but it's really kind of cool how they approach it. And then Mean Girls came up during the course of this discussion, which we have not done yet. And I think it is something worth doing at some point, maybe not this week. I did see Time Bandits hit Criterion, and
Yes.
that is a childhood favorite of mine. Molly, have you seen Time Bandits?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah, it's so much fun.
No, it's good. It's good.
Yeah. Then I have Simple Man, Hal Hartley, and then Crying Game.
Yeah.
And White Knights. White Knights is another one that I really, really like. It takes place in Russia.
Oh, so quickly, my list was Crying Game. We did Rowan Inish already. Uncle Bonmi, who can recall his past lives. I did look a little bit at L'Atalante, and I decided not that one. City Lights was on the list. A Hidden Life, which is gorgeous and heartbreaking. And we've talked about The Lives of Others was another one.
The German Stasi.
The German one.
Yeah. Great movie. I think we might have to get it, unless anything's jumped right out at anybody that we have to do. I think we might have to go Crying Game because I really want to see that. And I think it'd make for an interesting discussion.
Let's do it. Why wait?
Yeah. And it's a Crying Game. I'm gonna just look it up, see when it came out. I think it was 92. 92. So it is about 30 years old.
Really? Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah, right? So yeah, we are watching The Crying Game for the next episode of What Else Did You Watch?
Beautiful.
Perfect.